Hey everybody, welcome to Tuesday Talk with Deanna. I am so excited to be here again and to see everybody. I've got two guests with me today. Kelly O'Leary, who's with the DeLand Chamber, who's a repeat guest. So thank you, Kelly, for coming back.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You've got great stuff to share, so I'm super excited. And now I have a new guest, and actually Kelly virtually introduced us. We were supposed to meet last week and then tomorrow, but we're pushing it back another week. But again, so this is probably our first time meeting face to face, still virtual. But I've got Diane Erickson here with me, who you are a professor at Stetson University, correct?
I've been there since 2007 as a part-time adjunct, teaching the School of Business. So,
Wonderful.
and since I attended there as a student a long time ago, and my daughter went there, I've sort of come full cycle.
I love it. So anyhow, I'm so excited about today's topic. If you are just joining in, or if you've never seen Tuesday Talk, there are no rules. I kind of explained it. We have no rules here. This would be the same thing as if the three of us were having coffee together and you guys were just listening in on what we're talking about. Now, I did want to talk a little bit about storytelling, because if I've got Diane here, and she's really good at this, I'm told. I'm going to pick her brain about the art of storytelling, but who knows where the conversation is going to go. So anyhow, I do want to start with storytelling. Like, let's talk about, you teach storytelling to your students, correct?
Yes, it's part of the public speaking process. I teach professional business communications. And just even part of teaching is telling stories. A student will not remember 10 years from now some theory, much less the guy's name or the gal's name who did the theory, but they'll remember the story that I told them. And by remembering the story, it will help them in their current situation, dealing with whatever problem they have at the moment. So storytelling is vital. And when they want to do public speaking, of course, stand up in front of a crowd and speak, oh, and I hear all of that. And I use the famous word yet when they say, I'm not good at speaking. I say, add the word yet. By the end of the semester, you will be. And they tell stories. And one of my favorite last day of classes, we were doing impromptu speeches, just filling time. We'd finished all the projects, all the grading was done. And people were doing little impromptu speeches. And a student kept saying, we don't want to leave yet. I want to tell another story. Story. So that to me was a very successful semester.
Mm-hmm. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, it's storytelling.
I love that. Yeah. So funny story, and I think I've shared this before, but Kelly, I don't know if you know this. When I was starting college, I was torn between going into business or going into psychology. I love both topics a lot. So I couldn't decide. And the reason I chose psychology, which I have no regrets on, is because I didn't have to take public speaking. But now I'm in Toastmasters. Now I speak at conferences on digital marketing. So it's kind of funny that that was my biggest fear. Like in high school, my hands would get sweaty. My stomach would do somersaults when we had to give a speech in front of the class. I would be a wreck. I would pray to get sick. So then sick long enough that I would never have to do it, right? Which that never happened. But I was terrified.
You didn't have the right teacher, because
you
need to sneak up on them on public speaking. They don't realize the first day of class, I have them turn to the person next to them, and so they can introduce them. And so, they spend 5 minutes getting to know the person sitting next to them. These are all freshmen for the most part. And then I said, okay, the two of you stand up, and A introduce B, and then B introduce A, and they sit down. They really had their first public speaking and didn't even know it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
And then
it. You know what? You're right. I wouldn't have realized that because I always got in trouble for talking in class. That's on every
No.
report card.
Oh,
I
no.
did. I know.
Kelly.
Not me.
Every report card.
Yeah.
Had
Yeah.
a comment about that.
Yeah.
But it was just that tailored, structured thought that terrified me.
Yeah. Well, the thing is to make it unstructured. You're telling a story.
You're right. So
if you take the structure out, it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. So how do we tell a good story? What goes into a good story? And this is so important in marketing as well when you're talking about your business, whether you are thinking of how can I create content. And I know you're not in the social media
I do
realm.
some.
Exactly. You touch on it in your classes,
Yeah.
But whether you're creating content for your social media post or you're creating content for your website, copy is so key in converting business. But what goes into a good story?
Heart.
Ooh. I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, pretty direct, huh?
I was going to say, you want something too that is one that you're passionate about, because I can have my kids sit and tell a story about Star Wars or about Harry Potter and go into deep detail because he's passionate about it and he loves it. And he was showing me, he's now translated into video where he's doing videography, but he has to write the script to go with it and to produce it. And he showed me his highlight reel and I was blown away. I had goosebumps. I'm like, dude, that's really amazing. And, it's that storytelling, but he loves it. And so because he loves it, it shows. Now, if you ask him to go, he's got to do a report in English on, he says, an animal. He's like, I'm like, what'd you pick? I can't remember what he picked, but he was like, yeah, this, I'll do something. I'll make it work. There's no interest. There's no, I'll get by.
See, they get better at public speaking if it's something that they care about, for which they have a passion. You nailed it, Kelly. Passion speaks. And Deanna, I have to tell you, psychology and marketing, half of marketing, I was a marketing major, is psychology. Mm-hmm. It's understanding your audience. And that's the biggest thing when you're telling a story. Who's your audience?
Yes.
I do, because it's so important. And I can say it over and over again. It's not going to make the impact as an exercise. I have them pull out their computers or piece of paper, whatever they prefer. Most of them are on computer. I said, you're going to do it after a long weekend. So you had a great long weekend. You had lots of fun, didn't you? Oh, yeah. And I said, okay, I want you to write one paragraph to your best friend about this great weekend you had. And then I want you to write one paragraph about this great weekend to a parent. One paragraph about this great weekend to a grandparent.
Oh, my.
And then share them. And they can be hysterical. I'll try to repeat one. It was a great student. I just loved him. He became a fabulous public speaker. Had so much energy, and he's from South America, and I can't do the accent, but he wrote to his best friend and used some language for which I will not repeat. Such a great weekend. Nona, as his grandmother, Nona sent me some money, and the guys and I got some alcohol, and we did this, we did that. We were all this and that. He just must have been quite a weekend, is all I'm going to say. And then he writes his mother, dearest mama, we had a long weekend here at school, and it gave me the opportunity to catch up some work and even work ahead. I really appreciate the sacrifices that you and Papa have made for me to come to this fabulous university. I thank you so much. And then to his grandmother, dearest Nona, don't tell your beautiful daughter, but man, did I have a great weekend. I appreciate you sending me the money. The boys and I had a blast.
That's amazing.
Consider your audience. It's all about your audience.
Yes.
I love that example because I talk about that all the time. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that small business owners make when they're trying to target their audience. They don't know who their audience is. They want to talk to everybody all the time.
Yeah.
And that is the perfect example of why it's so important to know who you're talking to. I love that.
Yeah. Use it.
What
it's
a great,
I
thing.
may.
Yeah. It's a great
Deanna,
teaching tool.
what a great segue too into like the chamber and what we do with when we get guest speakers.
Mhm.
We know we have a wide audience and a broad spectrum of different businesses. And so the guest speakers that we get, we try to find someone that is going to engage, is going to provoke questions, provoke thought, to help the small businesses. We want them to be interesting so that they're getting something out of it. It's not just one business doing something and, you know, not everybody might get a piece of it. We try to get something that's very interesting, or it's like this yesterday's speaker was around, we had around the wellness, and it's Bibi LeBlanc with Culture to Color. And she did an amazing story because she told her story of growing up in Berlin. She was born 2 years before the wall went up, and then explained how her life was. And she had family. I can't remember which side she was on, but she had family on one side and her family was on the other side. And it was that she used to be able to go visit, but they couldn't come over. And they knew that their family's apartment was bugged and that the Stasi were watching them. And so she's just a really, I mean, powerful moment. And then how she came to the States, and then she was home and she got a call that the wall had come down. So she and her friends loaded up in her car, and she had pictures of it and how, and just, it was just fast. Oh yeah. Oh, Diane, it was an amazing story that she told. And, you know, everybody was just so impressed. And she had a piece of the Berlin Wall that she shared with all of us. And there was a picture of her taking it out of the wall. And it just how she came to the States and how her passion for travel and what she did translated into what she does now. And her first adult coloring book was The City of DeLand. And now she's gone into other things that are just amazing. And so it's helping, she wants to help people to tell a story about either, you know, whatever they might want to do. And it's just fascinating to see. And just like you said, how do you engage somebody, you know, and to the point of talking in person, she goes, I'm really, really nervous. I said, why? You know this. And this is your, you know, this is you. And she says, well, I'm not used to standing up in front of people. I'm like, you're going to do great. Well, by the end of it all, she wasn't ready to give up the mic. I'm like, she was having a great time. And she's like, this was so helpful for me, and being able to, you know, get over that fear, because she wants to do more of this public speaking. And it's easier when you're passionate about, as we said earlier, passionate about what you're doing, how easier it is to tell your story. When you, you know, when you're not passionate about it, or I will confess, when I was in college and taking a speaking class, I had to get up and do a speech, and I was not prepared. I did it last minute, and I might have done some things that weren't exactly my things. And I knew it. And as I was speaking, my mouth felt like I had cotton balls in it. And I was, you know, no spit to swallow or anything. And my professor called me out, and I was like, okay, I'm never doing that again. But, you know, not being prepared is not fun.
Yeah, no, it's not. And I want to touch on what you just shared, Kelly, because here's the importance of telling your story. BB sells adult coloring books. It's just a coloring book, right? There's a million adult coloring books that are out there right now that we can choose from. How many ever? I don't even know, right? Hundreds, thousands. Yeah. But when you tell your story, I bet everybody in that room wanted to buy that coloring book to support her, because now they know that they like her, they trust her, they've heard that story, she's connected with them. And now that coloring book isn't just a coloring book. Right. Now they see her through her eyes of how she created it. And now it's something much more special. And that's why it's so important to share your story.
And that's what we did prior to that. And that's what prompted her, because we had her on the schedule to speak, and it prompted her because we did a round tabletop discussion of what is your story, as far as, you know, I mentioned earlier about how did you get into your business? What is your passion for it? And our photographer talked about when he was a child and working with his father with the reel-to-reel, the help me out, the camera. Say it again.
It's the movie reels, the magnetic, the Super 8s.
Yes, Super 8s. That's exactly it. The Super 8s, and just you know, he explained how his passion as a kid was with that, and it just led into his photography. And so when you're talking to other people, it was trying to help them engage in like, what is your passion and why do you do what you do? You know, I'm sure Deanna, you've got a story of why you did what you did, and yours is a great story. And Diane, you and you know where I'm at, and it helps to convey what you really love about what you do in your business.
People connect with you better if they
Yes.
understand something about who you are.
Yes.
It's important to be able to tell your story. And I talked to the kids about this, just the little one, the elevator speech. You're in an elevator, you're going for a job interview, and somebody says, "Oh, I haven't seen you before. Tell me about yourself." And you have to be prepared to have that little 30-second elevator speech.
Mhm.
And I've known people to get interviews from that. You know, I'm a senior at Stetson. I'm majoring in marketing. I'm here to talk to someone about an internship or whatever. And, you know, my passion is marketing and whatever. And later on, oh, guess whose office they walked into for that interview? It was that person in the elevator. And the person said, you know, you handled yourself really well right there on the spot. That says a lot about you. And continued on. Got it. He got the internship, and later it became the job.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
That's
You
awesome.
have to be prepared for those. Kelly, as you said, preparation's everything.
Mm-hmm.
So every business needs to be able to do that. Who are you? How did you get started on this? Tell me about yourself. Tell me about your business. All those things. And I'm working with someone who's not done political speaking before. And I said, there are going to be some questions you get. You have to do your homework. How are you going to answer these questions? I said, this is your homework. You have 12 questions. How are you going to answer them? So that it just comes out smoothly.
Yeah, that would be challenging. I mean,
Yes.
well, I'm not. I hate politics, right?
Me
But you
too.
have to understand politics. So I'm thinking of political speaking. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, that would be torture if I
Yeah.
ever had to.
Well,
give a
fortunately, this is
political speech.
non-party affiliated, so I was
Okay.
that I can do that. I can't do divisiveness,
Mhm.
and it was all about DeLand, so I'm okay with that one.
Oh, that would be easy.
Yes, you're
Well,
speaking
not
to my
easy,
heart
but
there.
that would be much easier
Yeah.
than political
Yeah.
speaking.
Okay, Diane, I've got a question for you, because one
Yeah.
of the things I've tried to teach my son, who's 16, is when you're having conversation and you're not sure of what to say, instead of throwing in the and uhs, it's to pause.
Yes.
It shows that you're thinking, you're processing. There's nothing more that drives me crazy when I'm talking to someone and every other word, or you hear someone and it's or they can't. And I you know, mentally smack myself when I do it. And it's, you just take a breath.
A pause is powerful, just like that. When you're telling a story and you can just stop, the focus comes to you. The same thing with your tone of voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're out there, you're really talking to everybody, and then it gets to be very important, and you bring your voice down, and you're a little quieter, and people are really listening. Facial expressions help too.
Oh, yes.
When you're teaching. Yeah. And
I
the best thing is to take people outside. Got a beautiful campus. All the students outside. I do this once a semester. I make homemade brownies, and I have a fishbowl with impromptu speech topics in it. And they pull out a speech, and they get a brownie. Then they do it in teams of 4. They get to sit down, and each person's thinking and having their brownie. Then they take turns. They stand up, and because they're outside, they're automatically projecting their voices.
Mm-hmm.
They're standing with their chest open. They are communicating. They want people to hear them. And then they get their second brownie and sit down and enjoy it while the next speeches go on. Then the next group of 4 does that. So nobody has too much time to think about it. And they like it because there's not a huge amount of planning. They just get to talk.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds so similar to Toastmasters, as I shared earlier offline. I'm part of Toastmasters. I've only been part of it for less than a year. I'm not sure when I actually joined, but I believe that maybe 9 months I've been part of it. I was an right. And I'm still guilty of the so I throw so's out there like it's my job. But but it does make you more aware. And as afraid as I was before in high school of public speaking, and I was still afraid, even though I was being asked to speak at different conferences and talk about digital marketing, a topic that I'm very confident about talking about. There was still a fear of being part of Toastmasters, because actually I had somebody who would invite me all the time, and I would say no because it was so intimidating. When I moved to Florida, I made the decision to do it when I was invited, because I'm like, well, nobody knows me, so it doesn't matter. Right? I'm free. They can judge all they want. They don't know me.
Yeah.
But I see the value, and to be really honest, I think it's so important for people to take a public speaking class, if not several classes, because it does build a confidence that I wasn't aware of prior to joining it. It does so much more than just teach you how to speak. There's so much value in it. I think it's just so important. I wish I had done it in college. I wish I had faced that fear. But again, I don't regret my degree because, like you said, Diane, it does go hand in hand with what I'm doing now. And I love psych, and I'm grateful for that background. But I wish I had the courage in college to just do it, because I see as an adult how important that is.
Well, the other thing too in public speaking is to not rely upon PowerPoints. And there's a wonderful YouTube that I share from this great guy from Sweden who speaks so well anyway, but it's called Death by PowerPoint. And I'd hate to be the guy who had to do, or gal who had to do the speech afterwards after he spoke. And we talk about, too many words, and the focus is then on the PowerPoint rather than you. And I remind the students, you are the presentation. This is about you. It's not about that thing behind you. And if you put too much focus on that, you lose your audience, because that's where their focus is.
So true.
Yeah.
That was nice. Go ahead.
Haven't you ever experienced death by PowerPoint? Oh.
Well, when you have someone that puts a lot of slides in that maybe have too much text, and you're trying to read what's on the slide versus trying to listen to what they're saying. Whereas yesterday, the PowerPoint that was used, it was photographs. So as she's telling her story, you've got the imagery to go with it.
Perfect.
And that was so powerful.
Perfect.
Absolutely, yes.
And there are times when you can't be there and the PowerPoint has to do the entire thing for you. Then a wordy PowerPoint presentation makes sense because people are reading it. But when you're presenting in person, you want fewer words from the PowerPoint and more words from you.
It becomes a crutch, I'm sure, for the students too, because do you find that some of your students are looking at it versus looking at the class and presenting?
Yeah, they start that way. They don't end that way.
Of course not with you.
Well, it's a learning process, and of course, they all are very technically oriented because they've grown up with this. So, a presentation, we'll do a PowerPoint. So the first one they do, it's part of the introduction to slowly to public speaking, is we talk about the culture of a business. So they do a scavenger hunt for the culture of Stetson, because remember, most of them are freshmen. And I have a list of 8 things that they must find, and then they have to find 5 of another list of 8. So they make it theirs, and they do this together as a group, and they put together a presentation. And so, of course, it's going to have too many visuals and too many whatever. But the biggest thing is to get them to stand up as a group and each present the pieces that they've put together. Again, they're standing with a group, so it's not by themselves. The focus isn't just on them. And they're much more comfortable with that. But they're telling the story of their discovery of more about the culture of Stetson. And some students will say how they tried to learn that before they came, whether they did it on campus visit or they were on the website looking virtually. And websites are so important. And I think we forget that sometimes because that's people's first introduction.
Right.
And so how do you do that? So having them, and then their view of the culture of Stetson. I love the ones that came with the little acorn. Said it was the mission of Stetson. They said, this is the mission of Stetson, to take this little teeny acorn and make great big trees of us.
Aw.
Nice.
Telling a story.
I like that.
Got everybody's attention.
Mhm.
Telling a
Yes.
story. It wasn't
Yeah.
just a picture on a screen. It was telling a story.
Having something there to physically tangible to look at too.
Yeah.
And then Deanna, what she just said about websites, which ties into what you do as far as, making sure that someone's presence online, as you said, Diane, is so important because it might be someone's first glance if they're not able to meet in or go to campus in live.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And where psychology really plays into your website and telling your story, it's all those components. A lot of times people will build a website and on the front end, it looks really pretty. And they're like, oh, it looks so nice. Look, it does this. But in reality, you want that website to work for you. So you almost have to take the end user through that buyer's journey. You've got to, in that first, we call it above the fold, right? So when you go to a website, before you even hit scroll, you have to let them know what you do and how you solve their problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then you take them through all the questions that they're going to have about your product or your service, and you're going to answer them as they scroll down your site to see, is this what I want? And a lot of times people don't do that. They either don't put enough information on their website, or they put way too much. And we don't read online the way we would read a book, right? We don't take the time. We skim, we read a couple sentences. Does it apply to me? If it applies to me, great. I'll go back to the top and keep reading. And if it doesn't apply to me, I'm moving on.
Again, it's back to who's your audience. Are you writing your website
Yeah.
for your audience? Are you telling your story so that you've captured their attention? You've captured their focus. And again, with public speaking, there are different types. Are you speaking to persuade? Are you speaking to inform? And the same thing is true with your website. What action do you want from them? If it's a purchase action, which you just walked through, is it a thought action? Is it for them to go and do?
It's true.
What's your objective? Who's your
Right.
audience? What's your objective?
What's the hook
Amen.
on the front line? Because that comes with the speech. What's the first hook that you're going to get them interested? A book that we pick up to read. Who reads the first couple lines of a book? Because I know I do. To look at it, and it's going to grab my attention. Do I want to continue reading it? And same thing with with a website. You look at it and go, ew, the content on the front page does not look good. I'm not impressed. And so you move on to the next person.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's so much. And then when you're doing a website, it's important to know what's the interaction. How are you tracking that information? You're doing a campaign on your website. How do you capture what's going on? And that's changed dramatically in the last few weeks because of privacy policy. We all have to rethink our campaign management because of the whole cookie consent platform. And in the US, we talk about serving their cookies. This conversation with my daughter last night. She said, when you serve the cookie, when you serve the cookie on the website, you give them the option. In the US, that they're going to accept cookies is the default. It's checked. In the UK, when you serve the cookie, it has to be unchecked. And if you violate that, you're spending thousands, hundreds of $1,000s in fines for presenting the cookie as the wrong way.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
They've really, after it's GDPR, which is what that law is called, and it's in the UK. It's not in the United States. However, you can't control who's going to your website. You can have somebody in the UK visiting your website, and so you have to be compliant. And that really came into effect right after Facebook had that huge breach with Cambridge Analytica, and all of our data was given up. And so now there's this huge awareness on our privacy, our data privacy, and we see it. We're hearing about it with Google. We are seeing DuckDuckGo has, I think, a great commercial right now
Mhm.
where they've got Google looking over the shoulder and, and they're eliminating it, right? Because DuckDuckGo does comply with all the privacy. They don't track you the way that Apple does, the way that Google does, the way that Facebook does, like, the way the majority of the platforms do. So there's this huge awareness now, and there's a lot of changes that are happening. Not more so UK. UK is just ahead of us. We know that it's going to come here and we'll have to be compliant. Right now we have to have like privacy policies that explains what we do with that data. If your website does not have a privacy policy, make sure you put one up, because attorneys will look at that too. They're going to go to your website and see if there's a privacy policy and that explains what you're going to do with your data. And so a lot of times people will say, well, I don't collect your data. Like I'm not collecting your data, but you are. You don't realize it, because every time somebody visits your website, their IP address is being tracked by Google Analytics, by whomever. You can tell who's. You may not be able to tell. Like I may not be able to say, well, Kelly and Diane were on my website today. There's software that will tell me that Kelly and Diane were on my website today. But normal, without buying that software, it will show their IP address, whether they came on from a computer or their cell phone. It will give the IP address of everybody who's visited your site. So we do collect data without realizing it. So I love that your daughter brought that up, because it is so important to make sure that we are just aware of that as business owners. If you're on a digital platform, which I think all business owners are at this point.
Yeah.
COVID.
Well, we don't have much choice these days.
No,
And Apple's making big ads now about what they're doing with privacy and blocking. And I use a lot of Apple products, and I invoke those privacy policies all the time. But you have to be aware of it. So they're now advertising, so there's awareness. And the other thing that's important, we talked about websites, but you need to sort of select your platform. If you're very business oriented and you're wanting to build your network, it's the LinkedIn that you're looking to. If you're setting up your employee brand, if you're recruiting, it's LinkedIn. What's going on with Instagram? Of course, the kids do Snapchat. I've been familiar with all these since I teach them.
I'm sure you hear it all in the classroom.
Yeah.
What do you hear the most from your students? Like, what platform do they talk about most in your class?
Snapchat, and they use Instagram and TikTok because they put together little videos. So those are the ones I use the most. And I will tell you, in the fall, it was difficult. I was teaching students who'd spent over 2 years in COVID in high school and depended on the school very much. But we were back to a sentence starts with a capital. It ends with a period. The personal pronoun I is always capitalized unless you're E. Cummings, which I had no idea who he was, the poet. So because all they'd been doing was texting and Snapchatting, and you don't capitalize the word I when you're texting and so on. They don't worry about sentence structure. So we were back to very beginning. I told them, the students, I said, listen, it's not your fault. You were stuck in this situation, but you're going to fasten your seatbelts. Hang on. By the end of the semester, I'll get you there. You'll be writing great APA-style papers, doing great academic research, public speaking, all that. But you're going to have to fasten your seatbelts. Hang on. Stick with me. We'll get there. At week 7, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. And all of a sudden, in week 8, it connected. I'm like, are these the same people? Am I reading the same papers? What happened? I cannot tell you what the final thing was. I think it was just a cumulative effect. But try to get from that, all they've been doing was that type of communication to being able to communicate fully, understanding your audience, telling your story. And you can't tell your story if you can't put these basics together. And it's just so important for them to be able to do that correctly. And I say all the time, it doesn't matter how stinking intelligent you are. If you can't communicate it in written form, in oral form, you can be absolutely brilliant, but nobody's going to listen to you. Nobody's going to, well, if you're not talking, nobody's going to get this if you can't communicate.
That's really scary, though. That, I mean, 2 years is a long time, but it's not a long time.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're talking college students. We're not talking about middle school, where 2 years of schooling is a huge chunk of their educational
But still,
background.
ages
college.
16 to 18, 15 to 18, that age range, all of a sudden to have all of that structure gone and not required of them and not practiced. They were just totally out of practice. And
I see it with my son, you know, even now it's, you know, because when he went from 8th grade into high school, and what he was doing.
Right.
And so what he was doing in middle school was so different than when he got into high school. I'm expecting him to talk about papers he's writing and about this he's doing. There's no handwritten anymore. As you said, Diane, it's all online. It's all on a computer. I don't see hardly any notes from him. I mean, it's just all retention. I'm like, how are you remembering all of this? And it's crazy. But when he, like I said, when he speaks on something that he enjoys, it's great.
Yeah.
You know, and that makes all the difference too. It's just that I get what you're saying as far as a transition period time for them and how they speak to each other versus how they should be speaking to professors or to, you know, fellow peers in their field or whatever it might be.
Again, it's who's your audience?
Yeah.
Do that paragraph thing.
I love that.
That is scary to me, though, of like, what does the future hold?
These are the people who are going to be making the decisions about your senior health care and what nursing home you might be in or whatever.
No.
Yeah. Scary. I'm closer to that than you are. I mean,
Wow.
I don't tell the students that what year I was at Stetson, but I turned 70 in January. So it's a whole world of experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I still remember vividly when I was a freshman in college, vividly the papers I had to write. And we took notes on 3x5 cards. In the back of the card was your, what was your reference? All the commas and capitalized and dates and everything. In the front of the card was your notes.
Gosh, I remember doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they don't do that. They cut and paste.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have there are links that they can use to connect, to put it in whether you're doing APA style or MLA or Chicago style, and it'll put it in that for you automatically and put it next to your notes.
Oh my gosh.
God, it's so much easier.
Yeah. And then there's a website called Grammarly.
I was just going to ask
Oh,
you.
I have Grammarly.
Yeah.
I pay for Grammarly, and I love it, but I know it's probably a teacher's nightmare.
No, it isn't. It's a tool.
Not?
Oh,
Okay.
particularly when I have students for whom English is not their first language.
That's true.
And because I kept saying, this is so good. She said, well, I cheated. I used Grammarly. I said, I told you about Grammarly. It's a tool. And you need it right now because the reinforcement comes immediately that it wasn't correct. So you're not learning it the wrong way and then having to unlearn it and relearn it correctly. Grammarly corrects you immediately. Oh, I teach like this too. It corrects you immediately. So then you've learned it the right way.
Interesting. Well, I've got a little point for you on Grammarly because I'm glad you brought that up. BB shared with us that she was part of her writing and she has it in Grammarly to kind of correct and look at things. Mm-hmm. She used the words, the terminology, the post or the unmanned post. And Grammarly came back and said, you might want to check. This may go against gender bias kind of things.
Yeah, they just started doing that.
Kidding.
No.
I have not come across anything like that yet. I'm not surprised.
I was floored. And I thought, my goodness, okay. So, unmanned was not proper.
Yeah. But, when you're talking about a military post, unmanned is the phrase that they've always used.
Right.
Unpersoned, it's difficult sometimes. I grew up where man was sort of a generic term, like mankind.
Right.
We didn't talk about man and womankind or it kind, or it was just mankind. It's human. But it's very different now, and people can be offended. It's hard to write without gender. I had to do it for a student who was transitioning from one to the other and was applying for an LGBTQ scholarship and wanted a letter of recommendation. And so there I am trying to then not say she or he. So it was the student, or using the student's name, and the name was non-gender specific. And I didn't know which way the student was transitioning, and it was none of my business anyway. But it was a challenge to write without gender in this letter. And it was a really good exercise for me. And this was 2008 I did that. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it taught me a huge lesson. And I share that with my students, that and it is important. And some of them, Stetson has a very diverse community in so many ways. And I love it that the students can talk about it. We had a big conversation online last spring because we were teaching online, and they'd gone into rooms to discuss things, and they all came back together. One of the students says one of the things he loved the most about Stetson was its great diversity. So he says, okay, what does diversity mean to you? And they ended up saying, let's see if I remember this correctly. Diversity is wonderful, but diversity by itself is meaningless. It's a ticking of boxes. But diversity plus inclusivity creates community.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah. Wow.
that's good. That's
College freshman. College freshman.
Wow.
Yeah. It was wonderful. What a great discussion.
That's amazing. I love that. I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but we had the DEI training yesterday that Main Street DeLand Association is doing in partner with the city of DeLand and County of Volusia. And we had stories that were being told. They brought Volusia Remembers up, and they were telling us stories about the lynchings that occurred. And there's 4 in Volusia County that we know of, as they said, and 1 right here in DeLand. And so it's trying to make people aware and tell the story, and the stories that were being shared by some of the folks that were there of how they're growing up in DeLand versus, and I'm thinking of how I grew up in DeLand and the differences. And it's amazing to hear the perspective. That's another way too of the storytelling, is whose perspective is it coming from? Because my perspective is one versus somebody else's is like, that's not how I saw it. So it changes your story too.
Yeah.
I remember during the Chamber's Women Empowerment panel, and I apologize because the woman that I'm thinking of, she was a nurse, and then she ended up being in a political seat. She
Joyce Cusack?
Yes. She was amazing to listen to for me.
Yes.
Hearing her story, and she talked about that, about going to downtown DeLand and wanting to get a Pepsi or a Coke and not being permitted and being in trouble and going against what her mom said and still going with her friends down there trying to get served and not being allowed to. And I remember just listening to her in awe, not even being able to wrap my brain around what that might feel like. And she was amazing. I was so impressed by her and her story. She pulled me in. She definitely pulled me in.
Again, it's living when they can express it in such a way that you're living their experience, as you said, pull you into their life and you can see it through their eyes. It definitely makes it a lot more powerful.
She shared her passion, her path with you, her story.
Yeah.
Back to storytelling. A great story told well sticks with you,
engages you. Well, and that was in October of last year. So
good.
Yeah, that's
with
you. That made it.
Yes, I forgot her name, but if I saw her name, I would know it was it. But I remember her story.
Well, that ties back into what Diane said about that. You are teaching a lesson, and they may not remember the lesson or the who did it or whatever, but they'll remember the story that was told.
Right. Now, Diane, I have a question for you.
Okay.
And it kind of ties in with what Kelly was saying with her son. If he's talking about something he's passionate about, he can really pour that story out and share that story. But then there's times that we need to talk about things we're not so passionate about, but they're equally as important for us to share for our target audience or whoever we're presenting to, but it doesn't sing to our soul. What are some tips to try to build that passion into that story?
To understand the story, to research it, to know it, so it becomes part of you. It may not be your favorite, but if we start off talking about things for which we have a passion, where we have a really true and wonderful story to tell, then you get into understanding how to do it. So then when you're presented with doing, as they do at the end of the semester, a group research project, and it may not speak to all of them in the group, in the team, but it's part of the team process to work on this. And as they work through it, they're catching some sparks for one person will then jump to the next person. And the more they understand the topic, that brings about being able to tell the story because you understand it. Whether it's a passion for you or not, it's an understanding.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Because I think about that sometimes. As Kelly was speaking, I'm like, gosh, I remember being that student and not having any desire whatsoever to share. And that still relates in our professional lives. There are times that we're talking about topics that just really don't interest us, but we know it's important to talk about. So it's like, how do you dig deep and make it just as interesting? So educate yourself is what you're saying. Learn about it. Find connections, I'm guessing, of how it does relate to you so that passion builds a little bit more.
There are always connections, and it just takes a little while to uncover them, and particularly when you're still young. But if you can start learning when you're young how to make those connections, how to build those things, as your son does, Kelly, he's quite amazing. He's a phenomenal young man.
Well,
and I've known him a long time.
Yeah. Well, and two, I think back to in the table topic conversation yesterday that we had in the training, there was a gentleman that I didn't know. And we were each sharing our story. And the question was, when did you identify as a race? And so we were telling our story about when we identified as a certain race. And when it came time for him, he spoke and he shared. And then when it came time to share amongst the room, I kind of looked at him. I said, I'd love for you to share yours. He emailed me this morning and he says, I went in to observe. I went in and spoke to the presenters and then I sat quietly at a table. I did not expect to share. And he says, you engaged me, you brought me in. Now I want to find out more about what you do and why. And I think back to that also takes someone that is willing to, and Diane, what you do as an educator is drawing out from your students what is in them and getting them engaged in things and getting them excited about what they're doing and showing that they do have a meaning for what they're doing and where they're going and to help them with that presentation, because getting people out of their comfort zone takes a certain individual to be able to do that, it's so important. So
the key to that is to listen to them, not just what is said, sometimes what's not said. Yeah, that was my grandmother. Why do you think God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth? There's something to do with that specific ratio. And we teach listening skills too. But to listen to the students, to watch them, to see how they respond. And we were talking earlier, Deanne, before we started, Deanna, about some mental health, which has been an endemic during COVID. And I see it in my students, but I can see it in their faces as the semester, when we're getting close to those last 3 weeks of school. And there's just the deer in the headlights look. Like, how am I going to fit all this? And their mind gets spinning like this, so they can't focus. So we go through, we talk about it. And I just say, okay, we're stopping the class today. We're going to talk about this. And I'll ask the question, what's driving you crazy right now? And the biggest question to ask in the mental health process is not for me to make a decision about what's going to help, but ask them, what would help you the most right now?
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to help you?
Mm-hmm.
And then I taught them some breathing exercises to just slow them down, relax. We did some of those too. And I could see the difference in their faces as we went through this process. And they left the classroom less deer in the headlights than they came in. I don't know how long that lasted, but they at least had a good 20 minutes of letting loose.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about, putting together your schedule, that you have to have, yes, time for work, student athletes, time for the athletic endeavors and exercise and practice. Students who work, time for work, but you also have to schedule time for yourself
Mm-hmm.
and social time.
Yeah.
Because you can't leave those out of your equation.
Right.
So what is the biggest thing that's frustrating them right now after COVID? Is it?
It's still COVID.
Oh,
They were still wearing masks in the classroom.
Good point.
The time of COVID is not over, I'm afraid.
It's not. I don't know if it will
I'm
ever be over. I think
I'm glad that we're not dropping like flies from it, because we do have things to help us. But it's not over yet. But this summer they're teaching without masks in the classroom, because we taught with masks on. I was in an N95 the whole time.
Oh my gosh.
that had to be hard.
Wow.
Yes. And it was challenging. And then when you're doing public speaking, you want to see their reactions, their facial expressions.
Yeah.
And when you want that feedback. And so you're desperately looking at eyes, because that's all you can see. Yeah.
That's true.
But we learned to work around it. That's why, take them outside. We didn't have to wear a mask outside.
Nice.
Do public speaking. Mm-hmm.
And you're lucky enough to be in Florida, where it's typically
beautiful
nice
weather
all year long.
And what an incentive to do public speaking. You get homemade brownies, and
Right?
you get to pick a topic, and when you finish you get another brownie, and can I do one more?
You get another brownie.
I love your idea.
That's
and Diane,
great.
I love your approach to your students and encouraging them about public speaking without realizing that's what they're doing. I wish, I know I said it earlier, but I wish I had faced that fear. And maybe if I did have a teacher similar to you early on, maybe in high school, who eased you into that, where it wasn't as terrifying, I may have taken that path. But I'm grateful to be part of Toastmasters now and pick up where I left off, whatever that is.
It's never too late to get wonderful at something.
Oh, that's a good note to end on. I love that. That's a good positive note to end on.
Love it.
Yes.
Love it.
Thank you so much for joining in. Diane, it was just a pleasure meeting you. Kelly, thank you for introducing us. Well, Diane, you were actually on last week as a guest viewing and commenting. And Kelly, thank you for just connecting us and
Absolutely.
Of course for being on again. It's always fun when you're on this as well. So thank you both.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. We will catch you next week on Tuesday Talk with Deanna.